The news broke on a crisp September morning. It spread like wildfire across screens and social media feeds. Charlie Kirk, the founder of Turning Point USA, had been assassinated. The attack happened outside a conference center in Utah. A lone gunman was responsible. This act of violence sent a shockwave through the entire country. It was not just a political attack. It was a brutal act that targeted a prominent voice on the right. The nation, already deeply divided, felt a new kind of fear. It was a fear that political disagreements could now lead to bloodshed on our streets. This was a moment that felt different. Political violence is not entirely new to America, but this was a high-profile, targeted assassination. It was a political statement made with a bullet. The aftermath was immediate and chaotic. This was more than a news story. It was a crisis of the American soul. The feeling of being on the brink is not just a feeling. There are numbers that support this growing anxiety. Experts who track political violence have recorded a disturbing trend. According to data from the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, political demonstrations have increased dramatically over the past decade. More importantly, the number of demonstrations that turn violent has also risen. We are not just protesting more, we are protesting with more anger. These are not always large-scale riots, but smaller clashes at city council meetings, school board gatherings, rallies. Threats against public officials are another clear indicator of the rising tension. The United States Capitol Police have reported a significant increase in the number of threats investigated against members of Congress. In the years leading up to 2025, these numbers have climbed into the thousands annually. This is not just happening at the federal level. Local election officials, school board members, and even public health workers have faced a barrage of harassment and death threats. Polls conducted by institutions like the University of Chicago Project on Security and Threats have revealed something shocking. A significant minority of Americans now believe that political violence can be justified. Finally, we have to look at gun sales. The most obvious comparison is the period leading up to the American Civil War in the 1850s. Back then, the country was torn apart by the issue of slavery. It was a deep moral divide. It was an economic divide. Political rhetoric was extreme. Violence was common. Bleeding Kansas. The caning of Senator Charles Sumner on the Senate floor. Another historical parallel is the late 1960s. That was a decade of profound social and political upheaval. Vietnam War, civil rights movement, a generation gap that felt like a chasm. Cities burned during riots, political assassinations, Martin Luther King Jr., Robert F. Kennedy. Today, our divisions are not as cleanly geographical. Same states, same cities, same neighborhoods. This checkerboard pattern of division makes a traditional civil war with clear battle lines much harder to imagine. The armed forces also remain a unified and professional institution, loyal to the Constitution, not a political party. The 1960s also show us a path to de-escalation. It found ways to channel anger and protest into political change, even if that change was slow and imperfect. Those who believe America is close to a civil war point to the extreme political polarization. It's that they increasingly see each other as immoral, dishonest, and as a threat to the country. This is called affective polarization, or the politics of hatred. When you see the other side not as opponents but as enemies, the rules of normal politics break down. This mindset makes extreme actions, including violence, seem more justifiable. Portland, Kenosha, Minneapolis, demonstrations escalating into looting, arson, armed confrontations. We've seen clashes between far-right groups and far-left groups. These are not peaceful protests, they're street battles. The increase in targeted political attacks is perhaps the most frightening evidence. Before that, the attack on the US Capitol on January 6, 2021, the plot to kidnap Michigan's governor, attacks on FBI field offices. These are not random acts. They're planned operations with political motives. This resembles low-level insurgency or terrorism, a hallmark of societies sliding towards civil conflict. Finally, the information ecosystem is fueling this fire. The internet and social media spread misinformation, conspiracy theories, hate speech, people living in echo chambers with reinforced beliefs and the other side demonized. The breakdown of a shared reality is a profound threat to democracy. On the other hand, many experts argue that a full-blown civil war is highly unlikely. They point to the strength of America's core institutions. The US military is the most powerful in the world. It's a professional, unified force. Its leadership is deeply committed to the Constitution, and committed to the principle of civilian control. As long as the military remains a single, loyal entity, a sustained, organized civil war with two competing armies is almost impossible. Another key argument is the power and resilience of the American economy. Despite our political disagreements, we are all deeply interconnected economically. Supply chains, financial systems, labor markets. Most Americans have jobs, families, mortgages. The daily routines of life and the desire for economic prosperity act as a powerful brake on radical action. People are unlikely to risk losing everything for a political cause, even one they feel strongly about. Furthermore, law enforcement, while facing challenges, is still a formidable force. Federal, state, local. There are hundreds of thousands of officers tasked with maintaining order. The vast majority of these agencies are focused on upholding the law. The existence of a robust law enforcement and judicial system means that those who commit political violence will, for the most part, be arrested and prosecuted. Finally, we must not underestimate the quiet majority of Americans. The loudest and most extreme voices often dominate the news and social media. They really don't represent everyone. Polls consistently show that most Americans are tired of the division. They want politicians to compromise and work together. To understand the risk, we need to listen to those who study conflict for a living. Dr. Barbara F. Walter, a political scientist at the University of California, San Diego, has written extensively on how civil wars start. She argues that the United States is showing many of the key warning signs. One of her main points is the concept of anocracy, which is a government that is neither fully democratic nor fully autocratic. She places the US in this category, arguing that our democratic institutions have weakened. Another expert, Stephen Marsh, author of The Next Civil War, uses a different approach. He presents several scenarios of how a conflict could unfold. He argues that a future American civil war would not look like the last one. It would not be two armies fighting over territory. Instead, it would be a messy, decentralized conflict. It would involve targeted assassinations, like the one against Charlie Kirk. It would feature domestic terrorism, clashes between armed groups, and the breakdown of federal authority in certain areas. However, other experts offer a more cautious perspective. Dr. Rachel Kleinfeld from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace Studies countries that have successfully pulled back from violent division. She argues that while America's situation is serious, it's not hopeless. She points out that our institutions, while stressed, have not completely failed. She emphasizes that the path away from conflict involves strengthening democratic norms, holding violent actors accountable, and fostering cross-partisan dialogue. Finally, we have voices from the security community. The assassination of Charlie Kirk has served as a brutal wake-up call. It's forced America to stare into the abyss of its own divisions. The evidence shows a nation under immense stress, rising political violence, deep and hateful polarization, a breakdown in shared facts. The historical parallels to the 1850s and 1960s are honestly pretty unsettling. The warning signs are flashing red. To ignore them would be foolish and irresponsible. However, the case for resilience is also strong. America's institutions, particularly the military and the economy, provide a powerful foundation for stability. Our geographic and social makeup doesn't lend itself to a traditional civil war. The vast majority of Americans do not want conflict. They want peace and a return to normalcy. The nation has faced deep divisions before and navigated them. Our history is not just conflict. It's also recovery, reform, reconciliation. So what happens next? The future is not yet written. The path America takes depends on choices we make now. If we continue down the road of dehumanizing rhetoric, if we excuse or encourage political violence, if we retreat into partisan echo chambers, the risk of more violence and instability will grow. More tragedies like Charlie Kirk's assassination could become probable. This is the path to unraveling. The alternative is difficult but necessary. It requires a collective decision to lower the temperature. Leaders must condemn violence unequivocally, no matter who commits it. Citizens must engage in dialogue, listen to those they disagree with, and rediscover a shared national identity.